Welcome to Brain Friends, where two neuro nerds talk all things aphasia, language recovery, culture, and community. I am Dr. Dictrina Celeste Gatson, a clinical speech-language pathologist and neuroscientist.
And I am Angie Cawthorn, stroke survivor and aphasia advocate.
Welcome to our show.
Welcome to Brain Friends.
We want to thank all of our listeners for downloading the podcast. We appreciate everyone listening, so please tell a friend to tell a friend that we are here.
And we are.
Hey, Angie.
Hey, Dr. Celeste, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am fantastic. What are we doing? What are we talking about today?
Oh, today. I am so excited about today.
Okay.
Because I wrote a manuscript that is still in review.
Okay.
Donk donk. So I wrote a manuscript that's
wonk,
wonk. I wrote a manuscript that's still in review, and I really want to talk about it because I think that our listeners and speech language pathologists and our brain friends need to hear about ways to improve health equity in Black people with aphasia.
I'm so here for it. So you did some research, and so you're going to come and disseminate to us right here on the podcast.
Right here on the podcast.
Let's go.
I also had an opportunity to talk to Black people with aphasia. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about it, and you're going to let me know what you think. And we're going to do it right after we get into this icebreaker.
Okay. So you're telling me people better get their notebooks out.
Get your notebooks.
You might want to take some notes.
Definitely.
Because the doctor is about to start teaching after this icebreaker.
All right.
So what do we got today? What's the icebreaker today?
The icebreaker today is name something that you've done that has helped your brain.
This podcast. Editing and doing this has been a tremendous stretch for me mentally, and it allowed me to build more brain to be smarter, stronger. Yeah, it's helped a lot. Yeah. What about you? I don't want to say what have you done because you haven't had a stroke, but what have you learned, I'll say recently, that has changed your perception?
I would say I've had the opportunity to do implementation science and dissemination workshops lately.
Okay.
And that has been such a game changer because when we think about science implementation, sometimes people think you just do science, but understanding these frameworks that really help practitioners uptake evidence-based practice and, researchers use these techniques by telling policymakers and practitioners. There's a whole framework that goes into it. And so I've learned some things about that, and I think that that's really helped stretch my brain recently.
So you're getting some neuroplasticity too?
I'm getting some neuroplasticity too, but I also want to come back. You kind of said, oh yeah, I edit the podcast all humbly. First of all, you have done a phenomenal job with this podcast editing, and you not only edit it, but you add dings and beeps and you take out stuff and you have all these tracks that you use. And I mean, this is what people pay mad money for, and you do it for us, and it's phenomenal.
Thank you so much. And nothing like being appreciated by your partner. But the heavy lifting of the reading and the writing, you do all of that. So I tip my hat to you. This is where we're a good partnership. We complement each other well. And let me just say this before we jump into everything, drop comments and the likes and the shares on your listening, wherever you listen.
Right.
We need that. That's very important to us at this point in juncture in our journey together.
Right.
And I have to give a shout out to my people in Denmark.
Okay.
Come through, Denmark.
Hey, y'all.
South South Africa.
Yes.
We have listeners in Johannesburg, but we have listeners in 62 countries now, by the way.
Wow.
62. God is amazing.
Yes.
And we haven't done any advertising, but these particular listeners, whoever you may be, okay, you know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
We thank you because you listen we can track those. Not saying the people in Philadelphia, you know, we love me. We love you, Philly. But come through, Denmark. Through Ireland.
That's right. That's the most exciting part about this is, you know, we'll release an episode, and as our brain friends continue to grow, just seeing all the different countries people are listening in from and all the different states and cities that people are listening in from. We love you. We appreciate you. And yeah, definitely drop us a review, an email, just something, show love. We want to talk. Yeah.
All right. So tell me so let me get this right. You wrote a paper.
Right.
And you have the research to back it up because obviously you wrote it, you did some research, and you're going to tell us about what you found based on the health equity and the disparities in the Black community.
Right.
That's what we're talking about today.
That's what we're talking about. And so it was myself, my colleague, Peter Turkletop at Georgetown. We wrote this manuscript because I really wanted to communicate that there are more ways that any practitioner, but specifically speech language pathologists, can help health equity in stroke survivors with aphasia, or in this case, from some of the people that I spoke to, just Black people with aphasia, because it was people that have their aphasia due to stroke, due to brain tumor, due to dementia, everything. And so first, when we think about health equity, I want us to know that we're talking about the absence of unfair and avoidable differences among a population.
So that would be the definition of health equity?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Say it again.
So health equity is the absence of unfair differences or avoidable differences in health among a group.
Okay, something that's avoidable. Okay,
right.
I got you. So it could have been avoided. You opted to do something different than you would have for another person.
Consciously or unconsciously, yes.
And it's the unconscious that we really need to really hone in on, I'm assuming.
Well, so that's one of the ways. So one way that look at you leading us in. So one way that we can contribute to health equity is through an implicit bias training.
Okay, what does that look like?
So when we think about implicit bias, that is an individual's unconscious bias or stereotype toward a group, toward, in this case, we'll say Black people. Right. I think about a story where I was working in the hospital and I had just finished a evaluation on a stroke survivor. And the nurse said, I don't know why he's here. He's just going to eat fried chicken and be back in here in a little bit.
Wow.
And in that moment, I don't think she realized that type of thinking was a stereotype. It was a bias that she had in treating her patient, our patient.
Right. And feeling like and therefore it feels like it doesn't matter what I do, or I don't have to be as diligent because she feels like he won't be diligent, as if that's her call to make.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like when the guy came and told me I was having a panic attack when my hand is closing and I can't speak. That's 2 of the fast.
Mm-hmm.
That's 2. And you're going
Mm-hmm.
to sit here and tell me I'm having a panic attack. So that would be health equity that I was, or would that have been diversity problem that I experienced with them
Mm-hmm.
with well, let me back up and tell people what I'm talking about. When I had my 2 strokes,
Mm-hmm.
the paramedic came into my home and told me, well, we'll take you to the hospital if you want to, but you're probably just having a panic attack. The reason we called because I couldn't speak and my right hand was closing.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like, was that a health equity issue or a diversity issue?
So that sounds like it was a health inequity, meaning that it was that systemic difference that you were being treated, that you were being that he put on you, basically.
Right.
And so himself may need that implicit bias training because he was being biased towards you. But under the larger umbrella, that type of health inequity, which is, explaining away your symptom than what it really
Right.
is what contributes to individuals not having health equity, which is the absence of that type of bias treatment.
Right. And that's the part that would have been avoidable, because maybe if I look like him, he's like, oh, well, this doesn't happen to my
Mm-hmm.
sister.
Mm-hmm.
This is pretty serious.
Mm-hmm.
Versus maybe he doesn't know a lot of Black people. So he's like, well, maybe this is just what your panic attacks look like.
Right.
Because you're not laying on the floor and you're not saying your head hurts. So it's probably nothing.
Right. Right. Which brings us into one of the second ways, which is the need for workforce diversity.
Okay.
Basically, when we think about workforce diversity, it's important to have practitioners that look like you.
Exactly. Exactly. And that doesn't happen a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you came to the room for the Black Aphasians call ran by the NAA. Shout out to Nikki. She's amazing.
Nikki.
Hey Nikki and Michael. Oh. When you came to that room and I was like, oh my God, there's a Black SLP.
Mm-hmm.
You were like a unicorn. And it was like just magically dancing across the Zoom thing. And I'm like, look at her. But we don't meet people that look like us and talk like us. And it would be helpful, I believe, to have had that.
Why so you think, or you say?
Because we there's cultural differences
Mm-hmm.
that I need to prepare for when I go into a doctor's office and it's homogeneous in a way of
Mm-hmm.
everybody is white or everybody is something else other than me. I don't care if they're all other minorities. If I walk in and I'm the only one of anything, I'm odd man out.
Mm-hmm.
So now the way I talk, it comes into question. What I have on comes into question. How I present. And if I present in a bad way, do you take that and say, well, that's how all of them are? Because
Mm-hmm.
my hair is not combed. Now everybody for the rest of the day gets treated badly because maybe I had a bad attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's, oh, that's how all of them are.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't even know if I'm answering the question or just rambling. I tend to do that.
No, no, I think you said it perfectly, which is,
Yeah.
why we need workforce diversity. And when I think about workforce diversity, I think that also contributes to diversity in research, which is our third way to
Yes.
contribute to health equity, is having representation in research.
So I was in a work I'm still doing therapy. I was in a conversation group today.
Right.
But if we don't avail ourselves, and when we can't say as Black people, well, we're not part of the sample size if we don't show up and volunteer to do it.
Right. Right. But you also have to not only be comfortable, but when we think back to the workforce diversity, if you show up for research and none of the researchers look like you, then, how comfortable will you feel? Or depending on what the research is, they could be asking deep questions and it might influence your response if you're like, I don't know what these other people are thinking.
Right. And when you have to code switch,
There you go.
which I don't know if we can get a quick definition of code switch, but when you put on your, you have to come in and we have to present, and that's all people have to present a certain way because it's just the way the world is. But we tend to be judged a little harsher always. I say the wrong word, and now I'm dumb, versus if someone else says it, they just mispronounced it.
Right. Right.
Other folks tend to be given the benefit of the doubt. If I'm running late, I'm late, and that's just how I am. Versus if someone else is late, oh, they probably just had a problem this morning. Because people are given grace in certain aspects that maybe Black people just aren't.
Right.
Or other minoritized groups. But in this particular instance, we talking about Black people.
Yes.
Talk about my peeps.
Right.
My peeps.
Right. Which was another thing that was so interesting when we wrote the manuscript. One of the initial, feedback from the reviewers were, well, how can you talk about health equity if you're only going to talk about it in Black people? You got to talk about it in second English language learners and other minorities. And, I had to state pretty explicitly, I'm talking about Black people because, for this case here in America, Black people are the only descendants from slavery and have continued to be impacted by laws that were in place to divide.
Right, exactly.
And segregate. And so that's why, for me, it's important to talk about Black people because it's the ethnicity that's impacted.
And it's your community. Why would you say I can't talk about my grandmom and my mom?
Well, honey, they did tell me that, but that's another episode. But you mentioned the word code switch. And, when we think about code switching, it is when the speaker alternates between two or more languages or dialects within a conversation or situation. Right.
Like I'm a Philly girl. So everything is a John. Everything is a noun, place, or thing. And I'm not using John on my podcast. As much as I would use it in these Philly streets, I'm just not, because this is a professional forum. But if I'm talking to a doctor from Philly and she's, from around the way, maybe I will be like, yo, this joint is hurting, doc. This joint ain't letting up. Where I may not say that. And that's the type, and there's also a level of comfortability with like my GYN, shout out to Dr. Agar. She's a Black woman, my age, and amazing. And I can go and talk to her. And I'm so excited to see her because she was such a champion of mine when I had the stroke. She was like, listen, here's my personal number. You know what I mean? You call me if you need anything, girl. And that wasn't my GYN. That was a fellow Black woman saying, sis, you ain't got to go through this journey by yourself.
Because, right. That kind of reminds me of a funny story. When I know we were talking about research, but it even talks about just that diversity piece in the practitioners, to where I went to have dental work done. And, he was spraying, my dentist is African-American, and he was spraying my mouth and some of the water started to drip. So I was like, ooh, moving all frantically. and like trying to like mess, get my hair behind me. And he was like, "Oh, you just got to press out." And I was like, "Come on, dentist, for knowing, yes. And I will ask you to discount my fee if you get these edges wet, because I just."
I love that. But right, it's somebody who gets it. That is so nail on the that is nail on the head. That is perfect.
Yes. And the other thing when we talk about research too is, and this is a question for the researchers, how many times are you going into these communities wanting to do minority research? Because right now that's what's getting funded a lot. So everybody wants to do minority research, but you're doing the minority research, but are you going back into that community and sharing your results, sharing your findings? Or are you just going in, collecting the data, and then they don't hear from you anymore?
People want to be a part, and people will help you do your research, but come back and tell us why you're doing it.
There you go.
And tell me how it all worked out at the end.
Exactly.
And that's what I try to do with Rosa, and I try to do with Arch. And I've managed to find really good researchers that do that type of work. All right. So which ones have we ran through quite a few.
Right. So we have implicit bias training.
Yes.
Workforce diversity.
Indeed.
Research.
Come through.
And then the fourth one is health literacy. So when we think about health literacy, it is the individual's ability to understand information that is presented to them in order to make an informed decision.
Okay, so like the paperwork they give you when you leave the hospital.
Yes.
Okay. But the disparity comes in. If I have aphasia, I can't read it. Not to mention they give you like a tablet full of just, you get a folder 3 inches thick, and if I can't read it, then you're not giving it to me in a way that I can digest it.
Right. And so your ability to understand that information in order to make an informed decision is influenced. And, I'm not saying that, even though physicians should, make sure that this information is understandable, but the speech language pathologist, you should make sure that your client understands when they're taking their medicine, that your client understands the risk factors that could lead to another stroke, that your client understands how to spot a stroke. You mentioned FAST earlier. And so all of these things are related to health literacy and the individual's ability to understand the information and then make a decision for themselves versus me just telling you what you need to do.
So if a person cannot read, right? A person has aphasia, they can't read. I guess then it would fall on the caregiver.
Yeah, it could fall on definitely. It could fall on the caregiver. And when we think about that, also the need for caregiver training and for caregivers to be able to understand some of these resources and what my role is as a practitioner to, if I know that you have severe aphasia or just aphasia in general, am I working with your caregiver to make sure that you are going to be well the 23 hours that you're not with me?
Right. I did hear that there's a way that caregivers can get paid. And let's just give that information. Let's make sure we put that information in the notes, because if a caregiver can get compensated, I believe it's a government program.
Yes.
Let's make sure we put that in the notes, because that's important information, because folks may not have everything they need to go.
Sorry. No, you're absolutely right. There are programs, and we'll make sure to include that link, USA, www.usa.gov, disability caregiver, to where your caregiver could get compensated for helping you with some of those activities of daily living. So you're cleaning, you're cooking, bathing, dressing. We'll make sure to provide the link so you can have all the information. But that's a resource that the speech language pathologist should be sharing with you.
Come through, coin.
Okay.
Come on, coin.
Yeah.
Get this coin.
Okay. Because we know that sometimes with a stroke or with aphasia, if you're a 2-person income household, then you may now go down to 1-income household. And so if you're able to get a little support, then these are resources that we should be knowledgeable about in order to pass along.
And also to my people, let's not forget, they do pay you if you're in research. There is money available for you if you avail yourself to research. It's not a lot. It's not, it's nothing, but they do compensate you. So let's keep that in mind as well.
And then the last one I want to share, because I know we're running out of time, is my favorite, which is patient-reported outcomes.
Talk to me about that.
So when we think about patient-reported outcomes, we are looking to the individual with the disorder, with the disability, to give their own account on how this is influencing their ability to lead a fulfilling life. Right. And it's different from the clinician reported outcomes like your Western aphasia battery that I'm saying, okay, this is what's wrong with you. You know, that patient reported outcome that you are filling out, that you are giving your answers to. There's no right or wrong answer. It's your perception, and that's word.
Right. That's just so dope. So,
but even with the patient reported outcome, and I know you and I've had this conversation before about reading, I think, it's important to make sure that the patient reported outcomes are accessible with, either different versions or large print or pictures, just to where individuals that may have challenge with reading are able to read it and participate in it.
And answer the question, not what they think you're asking, but what you're really asking. And what Dr. Celeste was referring to, she asked me, you asked me a couple of weeks ago, well, you say you can't read, but you can read my text. And what I told you was, no, I get the gist of your text and I respond in kind and hopefully don't mess something up or say something wrong. I can't tell you how many times I've sent a text and somebody doesn't respond and I'm like, oh God, did I say something wrong? And I can read it and I might have said something wrong or left a really important word out. You can mistake a whole comment.
Because you helped me with that a lot, even from a personal perspective of, I think sometimes as a practitioner, we take on the role of cheerleader. Well, I know I did. And so besides me being a cheerleader, but we take on the role as cheerleader. And so I know even in our interactions, you would say, I can't read. And I'd be like, yes, you can. Yes, you can. And, one time I had to kind of step back because I had to make sure that I wasn't being insensitive to you by, you sharing that you couldn't. And in my mind, I'm like, you're responding to my text sometimes and you read those. So what do you mean you can't read? And so it wasn't until, you shared a little bit more that made me realize like, oh, okay.
Right. But yeah. And for the practitioners that are listening, I know you want to be the cheerleader, but sometimes very simple. Wow, that sounds tough. I'm sorry to hear that. It's much more better placed than no, it's okay, you're good. Also, when they tell me I'm as smart as I was, it doesn't affect my intelligence. Aphasia doesn't affect your intelligence, just your communication. I can't tie my shoe. I don't want to hear that I'm just as smart, at least not in year one. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't want to hear that. I want you to tell me, okay, Ange, well, let's work on that. Rather than telling me it doesn't exist. Acknowledge that I'm telling you it does exist and just come into the cave with me rather than trying to lure me out. Come and sit with me for a second and then then maybe we can come out.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, come in.
Right.
Just come in and sit with me.
That's good stuff. That, if you want more tips, I think our mental health episode in season 1 talks about that validation, and I mean exactly what you just said. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So in closing, our 5 ways that you can help health equity in Black people with aphasia is workforce implicit bias training, workforce diversity.
Yep.
Because sometimes people want practitioners that look like them.
Makes you feel better.
Okay. Research.
Come through.
Having representation and research and sharing your findings back with the community.
Indeed.
Health literacy.
A show.
So people can be able to make informed decisions, and then patient-reported outcomes.
Come through.
Okay? Because it's not about you. We want to know what the individual wants to be able to do.
Can somebody talk to me about how I feel?
And truth be told,
come through truth.
If you're working with someone, if the research isn't there, and so the representative sample isn't there, and the practitioner doesn't look like you, then you really do want to understand from the patient perspective what they want to do. They might want to learn how to play spades.
I need to.
Okay.
The shame of it all.
Well, and I think that's where I think it's just so important, and why this topic about health equity in people with aphasia is so important, because, systemic differences and the barriers that are in place. And we can't continue to talk about disparities. We have to start talking about what you can do in your own stratosphere as a practitioner to help health equity, to help make sure that there aren't differences in the treatment that you provided.
We're going to leave it right there, Dr. Celeste. That's what I'm talking about. This has been so good. Thank you for sharing the research that you've done and Dr. Peter has done to just shed a light. So I just want to thank you for the work that you've done and being a champion for stroke survivors as a whole, but definitely for being a champion for our community of Black stroke survivors and people with aphasia. Sharing your findings with us is so key. So thank you for that. And just thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you for being okay with me being able to share this, as I am not patiently waiting for it to come out, and if it will even come out. And so even if it doesn't come out, I know that one of the reasons we started this podcast was for science dissemination. So
mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished. Thanks, Angie.
Thank you, Dr. Celeste.
Bye.
Peace, y'all.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Brain Friends. Please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite streaming platform. Also, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Brain Friends, the podcast. I'm so extra.